Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined tonight by two guests. The first is a regular guest here on the show. It's Chris McCusker from the SNP Socialist Group. And on the other side of me, a slightly less regular but no less welcome guest is Douglas Chapman MP, an MP for Dunfermline and West Fife. So Douglas, first of all, how are you this evening?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, thanks for the invitation to join you tonight.
You're more than welcome. And Chris, how are you tonight?
I'm excellent, Kenny, and hello there to Douglas. It's nice to be on the programme with you.
Grand. Well, we start this evening, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there had been a total of 104,880 coronavirus tests concluded. Of these, 89,695 were confirmed negative and 15,185 were confirmed positive. 833 people were in hospital last night with either confirmed or suspected COVID-19, 28 of whom were in intensive care, with another 8 with suspected COVID-19, also in intensive care. This marks an increase of 29 confirmed new cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection has sadly risen to 2,291. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 37,048 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from the illness, an increase of 134. This number does refer to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And also today, the Office for National Statistics published its weekly analysis of deaths for week 20, which is the week ending the 15th of May. These show a total of 40,096 deaths related to COVID-19 in England up to the 15th of May, almost 10,000 more than the daily tally on that day. However, total excess mortality for England and Wales up to week 20 sits at 53,960, meaning that as of today, the pandemic may have led directly or indirectly to as many as 60,000 deaths. Depending on how figures are calculated, this could mean that the UK has had the worst per capita outcomes from the pandemic of any country in the world. And our first story tonight, Test and Protect, the Scottish Health Service's approach to controlling the spread of coronavirus in the community, will be rolled out across all health boards from Thursday of this week. From that date, everyone aged 5 and over who has COVID-19 symptoms of a new continuous cough, temperature, or a loss or change in their sense of taste or smell should go to the NHS Inform online or call 0800 028 2816 to book a test. Under the system, people will need to isolate with their household as soon as they have symptoms, and if they have a positive test result, they will be asked to provide details of all recent close contacts to NHS contact tracers. These people will be contacted and asked to isolate for 14 days. As part of the rollout, guidance for individuals and employers has been published which sets out advice on what to do if someone is displaying symptoms, or if they have been in close contact with someone who has tested positive. It includes information on how to self-isolate safely as part of the Test and Protect programme, what plans need to be made by households and families, and how to help older people or those with underlying health conditions. Additional support for self-isolation is also being made available to those who need it through the National Assistance Helpline. And coming to you first, Douglas, what do you make of this programme? Do you think this is the programme that we need?
Well, I think it's really another important step on the way to getting some control over the virus, but also to try and get people back to some sense of normality. Now, there's no doubt that beyond the summer, there's going to be a new kind of normality anyway. But I think people are looking for a bit of stability in their lives. And, I think this way of actually testing and protecting the communities that we all are part of and the families that we're part of is a really good move on behalf of the Scottish Government. I would say, in terms of people wanting to get back to work, obviously there'll be a huge controversy over the weekend with a certain person. I won't even begin to mention his name because my MP's post bag is rammed absolutely to the gunnels at the moment with complaints about the guy. But, I think in Scotland we need to have a much more sort of balanced and gradual return to getting people back to work, getting people back to school, and getting on with their normal daily lives. So I think this is a useful tool in that process, and I'm sure that if people recognise that there is a roadmap available, there is a way out of this. That if we just call canny a wee bit and be careful about what we're doing, then we can see a wee bit light at the end of the tunnel. I'm sure this is as I said, an important step along the way towards that.
Yeah, well, don't worry, Douglas. We will be discussing that person a wee bit. You can tell us a wee bit more about how your mailbag looks then. But Chris, coming to you now. There's been a lot of controversy, a lot of attacks on the First Minister and the Scottish Government about the number of contact tracers and the ability of the government to do this kind of test and tracing operation. But we know the Scottish Government now has capacity for 15,000 tests a day, apparently, and there are going to be up to 2,000 contact tracers in place very shortly. There are already about 1,000, I believe, in place already, which would be enough to manage this process right now. With the number of new cases that we have right now, do you feel confident that this is going to be enough to manage the process, and that we won't then have to go back into a deeper lockdown again at some point soon?
Well, I'm highly confident because I would like to point out that at Nicola's briefing this afternoon, she did point out that we have about 1,600 contact tracers at this moment in time who were ready to sort of step up to the breach. She did also point out the fact that ideally we would possibly only need about 700 of those contact tracers, and that's reflected obviously of the drop in the figures. So the point I was wanting to make was, it is a belt and braces approach, which I know Douglas doesn't want to mention the man, but Boris Johnson has given carte blanche to small businesses and markets to open up in England and stuff like that. Where it's virtually impossible to self-isolate, to social distance, shops operating on a one-in, one-out basis, then I think this is great, and also it offers guidance as well to employers. So that they can take the necessary steps in order to restart their much-needed businesses in the communities.
Mm. Yeah, well, we will be discussing some of that advice later on, but we do now move on to the man in question. And today, Junior Minister of State at the Scotland Office and the MP for Murray, Douglas Ross, today became the first member of the government to resign in protest at the Dominic Cummings affair. In his resignation letter, Ross wrote, "I have constituents who didn't get to say goodbye to loved ones, families who could not mourn together, people who didn't visit sick relatives because they followed the guidance of the government. I cannot, in good faith, tell them they were all wrong and one senior advisor to the government was right." Ross joins a growing number of Tory elected representatives who have expressed their anger at the government's support for Cummings. A total of 31 Conservative backbench MPs have now called on Cummings to resign. In Scotland, Tory branch leader Jackson Carlaw, along with fellow MSPs Murdo Fraser and Adam Tompkins, have also said that Cummings must consider his position. Commenting on the resignation, SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford said, "This will have been a difficult decision to make and I respect Douglas Ross for taking it. This issue transcends politics. It is about protecting trust and confidence in the public health advice. It is staggering that a Tory minister has had to resign over this before the unelected advisor who broke the rules in the first place. Many Tory MPs will no doubt be furious. The Prime Minister must now remove Dominic Cummings from his post without further delay." So Douglas, as we saw there, Douglas Ross saying that he's got a postbag full of angry constituents, and this seems to be a theme amongst virtually every MP. What's been the reaction from your constituents?
Well, I mean, I think the message has been just one of total disgust, and just at the disgust at the arrogance of the government, the arrogance of Dominic Cummings, to think that he could flout the law, as it were, and carry on activities as normal when every other person was thinking very, very carefully about the kind of journeys they were undertaking. Everybody, and certainly in my circle, relatives and friends were all, if they had any symptoms, were self-isolating. And certainly the stay-at-home message was something that actually played well in Scotland. I think, we've been pretty resolute and pretty determined and disciplined as a nation to actually take on board the stay-at-home message, and nothing could have been clearer from the letters I've received. Nothing could have been clearer from the constituents' point of view that was the message. You don't go and travel 260 miles across the length and breadth of the country, for whatever reason. Given that the stay-at-home message was so strong, and the very fact that Dominic Cummings was at the very heart of that policy, at the very heart of government, at a time where people should have been, looking at that message and making sure that they followed it for the safety of themselves, but more importantly, I suppose, for the safety of their own family and friends. So there's a huge outcry, and I'm seeing tweets from my colleagues all the time saying, post bag is full. There's messages coming in all the time, and we've tried to, yesterday, spent most of the day replying to messages that come in over the weekend from constituents who were absolutely furious that Dominic Cummings had taken the action that he did. And quite honestly, both the interview with the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and the resulting interview we had yesterday with Dominic Cummings, I think, has just made matters worse. And I know the line that everybody's pushing is that there's one rule for them and one rule for everybody else. But I mean, nothing has exemplified the arrogance of this Tory government more than the events of the last 3 or 4 days.
Mm-hmm. And, there are a wee clutch of Scottish Tory MPs down there. Clearly, in Scotland, a lot of eyes are focused, a lot of political eyes anyway, are focused on the fact that there's an election next year. And clearly, the Tories will want to insulate themselves from some of the political damage here. Do you think that the likes of Jackson Carlaw, Murdo Fraser, Adam Tompkins and Douglas Ross are going to have any impact on the decision-making of the number 10?
Well, I don't really think so. Douglas Ross put in his resignation today, and I've not actually seen it in writing anywhere, but I believe that the response from number 10 was that as a junior minister in the Scottish office, that Douglas Ross was a nobody. Mm. So, I think that's how they value people in Scotland, and to think that a minister in their own government can be swept aside so swiftly and in a way that is almost demeaning, not just of his office but of the individual himself. Again, speaks volumes for the way this government is going about their business. And I think it makes. I've not seen any recent polling, but I think there's a Survation poll out today that's suggesting that the Tories in Scotland are crashing and burning as we speak in terms of the poll numbers, which wouldn't surprise me. And if we can obviously hold that until into next May 2021, then we could see a real sort of reduction in Tory numbers within the Scottish Parliament, which in my book wouldn't be such a bad thing.
Yeah. And Chris, I mean, obviously Douglas Ross doesn't really chime with your politics in any way, but this has to be welcomed, doesn't it, by people who are concerned about what's happening in Whitehall just now?
He doesn't even chime in my football analysis, let alone politics. But the one point that I was wanting to make about Douglas Ross is the fact that, and hopefully Douglas will be able to correct me here if I'm wrong, but was he not one of the MPs who voted to end the virtual working from MPs' constituencies? If that being the case, then you know basically I think that he is grandstanding to his constituents and will be quite prepared to travel the 600 miles down to Westminster and work in Westminster and then travel back up to his constituency at the end of the week.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, I mean, Douglas Ross does have one of the smallest majorities, and all the Tory majorities in Scotland are pretty small. Douglas, coming back to you, do you think that come the next Westminster election, which we assume will be in about 4.5 years, although given recent history, it could happen in a fortnight, do you think people will remember this when it comes to that next Westminster election? Do you think this will be something that sticks in people's craw then?
Well, a week is a long time in politics, as they say, and people have fairly short memories. But there's certainly a drip effect that is changing the views of people about Boris Johnson and this Tory government. And, it's really hard to see how easily it'll be for Boris Johnson to regain the initiative after this. I think it takes a long while to build up a positive political reputation, but that reputation can be trashed overnight, irrespective of how good the person has been in the past or how good the party has been in the past. If they make one huge mistake, that can sort of spoil things for the future. So I think at the moment there's a lot of anger aimed at the Conservative Party in London. I'm trying to imagine the circumstances where Boris Johnson will be able to turn that around. But politics is a funny old game, and you never really know. But as things stand at the moment, and if we can keep up a level of positive opposition across all the opposition parties in the meantime, then who knows where that might go. But it's a long time for Scotland to suffer a Boris Johnson government, I can tell you that. 4.5 years, quite a strong mandate in terms of 80 plus majority in the House of Commons. It sounds like he can make as many mistakes as he wants, and he'll still be, getting things through the House. So we'll just need to wait and see. And as SNP MPs and Scottish MPs, we need to be doing our job to make sure that the focus for us is back on Scotland and on our constituencies to make sure that people here are best served during that period, irrespective of who's in power in London.
Yeah, and just before we move on to the next part of this story, do you get any sense, obviously you're not in the tea rooms and the bars at Westminster now, but do you get any sense that there are other government ministers, maybe other junior ministers or even cabinet members that might be thinking about resigning as well?
Well, there may well be. I think people are tending to keep their powder a wee bit dry at the moment. Obviously there's been some who have come out against Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings in quite a vociferous way. There's others at the other end of the scale who have, mostly cabinet ministers, I have to say, who have been backing him from the start. So, but I don't think that this whole episode has left the Conservative group of MPs in a good place at all. And I think they'll be sort of shocked and stunned by the level of kickback that they've had from their own constituents. And there's nothing that concentrates the mind more of an MP than the information and the complaints or comments in a derogatory way that are made by their own constituents. And I think they'll be feeling it really, really badly at the moment. But that's a problem they need to deal with.
Yeah. Well, we move on, and the SNP has said that Boris Johnson is undermining public health by refusing to sack his rule-breaking advisor, as a new poll reveals that the Tory government's approval rating has plummeted. The Savanta Comres poll, published today, reveals that Boris Johnson's approval rating has fallen to -1, a 20-point drop on 4 days ago, while overall Tory government approval has fallen to -2, dropping a staggering 16 points in 1 day. Commenting, SNP Deputy Westminster Leader Kirsty Blackman MP said, "This poll is more evidence that Boris Johnson is rapidly trashing public confidence in the Tory government by failing to remove his rule-breaking advisor Dominic Cummings from his post. If the Prime Minister wants to throw his own reputation to the wind, that is one thing, but he is now threatening public health by undermining trust and confidence in the rules. There cannot be one rule for the Tory government and another for everyone else. Leading public health experts are warning the failure to act is putting the whole strategy and public lives at risk." And Chris, just before I come to you, I should mention, you can see on screen there, we do have our Twitter up and active. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, if you have comments to make, do please keep them clean so we can put them on the screen. But you can join us using the hashtag Scotland@7. That's hashtag Scotland AT7. Please do get in touch. Let us know what you think. It's always good to know, and we'll bring up some of the best ones on the screen. But Chris, what do you make of this? How badly do you think this will affect people's understanding and acceptance of lockdown rules, especially given that as we go forward this week and next, we're likely to see a more subtle message than just stay at home or even stay alert. We're going to see a much more varied message. How badly do you think Dominic Cummings' behaviour is going to affect that?
It's absolutely shocking, and I think it's in stark contrast. Actually, I read in the New European today that Keir Starmer has actually got a 24-point lead on Boris Johnson in approval ratings. I can't remember the last time that a Labour leader actually had an approval rating higher than the Prime Minister. So, I find that really bizarre. But I think that the whole hashtag Cummingsgate will possibly come to a head at the end of the week. I honestly don't see Boris Johnson being able to defend them any longer than that. And as Douglas pointed out, it is replicated within the constituencies. And no doubt there's an awful lot of Labour voters who possibly didn't vote Labour in that red wall of the north of England, who are writing very angry letters to their MPs, basically asking them, is this what we voted for? Yeah.
Douglas, what's your take on this? I mean, as you said, you can trash a reputation overnight. Do you think how easy do you think it will be for Boris Johnson to win back some of the approval that he did have? Because he was riding relatively high, at least in England, on the back of his handling of the coronavirus crisis. Certainly a lot of sympathy for him, having been in hospital himself. How do you think he can build back this support if he intends to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think he cast himself fairly on as some sort of Churchillian figure, someone who could be relied upon to take us through the war and get us through the other side. And we had 100% bluff and bluster from him as well in the House of Commons about the what he would be doing to the economy and how Britain would be leading the world in almost every field you could possibly imagine. The coronavirus crisis has sort of blown all that to one side, because what is going to be from now on in is real hard graft to try and get, one, the economy back into shape, two, to rebuild that trust in the government, rebuild the confidence and the resources back into the National Health Service again. So all the things that Boris thought he could achieve have been knocked sideways by the very fact that we're dealing with this crisis. And what I've seen of Boris Johnson so far, he is not the man to lead you through this kind of crisis. I think on the other hand, Nicola Sturgeon has got detractors as well, but Nicola has at least been consistent. She's been confident, and she's shown herself to be competent in dealing with that, and she's been prepared to put herself in front of the telly, in front of the voters, the electorate, prepared to do that day in, day out. And I think that kind of commitment to the country and to try and find solutions to what everybody's going through, and to be honest, be human while you're doing it, has been something to behold. Whereas I think Boris Johnson has, taken part in maybe one or two, maybe three calls to the nation during the last several weeks. So that is not a sign of leadership, and at this time we need somebody to really lead, both at the UK level and the Scottish level, to make sure that we can all get through this and get our families back into some sense of safety, and make sure that in terms of when people have lost their jobs, or when people have got don't know what their future might hold, then you have people there that you can turn to and say, well, you might not be able to fix everything for us, but we know you're doing your best, and two, I can appreciate there's a level of empathy. We understand what people are going through, and I don't think that's something that's coming from Boris Johnson, and I think that's why he'll find it difficult to get through the next period of time, because I don't think he's a grafter, and I don't think he's got that level of empathy with the nation any longer, to actually allow the Tory government to see this period through successfully, but without perhaps changing their leader.
And do you have any insight at all into why Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings have chosen this particular strategy? I mean, a lot of people have said, had he come out and said, look, I panicked, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have done it, I'm really sorry, then he could probably have disappeared it back into the background, and people would probably have got over it. There might have been a bit of a stooshy for a bit, but people would probably have got over it in the end. Do you have any insight into why they've taken this attitude of saying that what he did was legal, responsible, full of integrity, it was the only moral decision, it was what any good parent would do? Do you have any idea why they have taken this incredibly arrogant attitude to what's clearly a terrible political mistake, even if you exclude the fact that it's probably a crime?
You still want me to answer that one?
Yeah, if you can.
I think it comes back to words like arrogance. It comes back to that sense of entitlement that I think people like Boris Johnson and some of his Tory government ministers actually, it's inbuilt into the way they think and what they do. I go back to 5 years ago, almost to the day, thinking about our first group of, or first large group of SNP members who turned up at Westminster. And quite honestly, that level of arrogance and that level of entitlement took me by, I must admit, it took me by shock, because I always had a view of Westminster, but I didn't really think it was anything like it actually turned out to be. And as I said, it's that level of arrogance and just a complete lack of empathy with people who do ordinary jobs, but they're vital. But what this crisis has proved is they're absolutely vital to the well-being of our society. The bin men, the posties, all these people who just get up in the morning and get on with their work. And without them, when we take that away, there's something that we lose. And I don't think that the Boris Johnson type of leadership really has any empathy or any understanding of how half these people and their families live their lives.
Yeah. And also at Westminster today, following a cross-party meeting, the Westminster leaders of the SNP, the Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru, the SDLP, the Green Party and the Alliance Party have written a joint letter to the Prime Minister warning that trust in the public health advice is being severely undermined. The letter from the 6 leaders representing parties from all 4 nations of the UK says, "This is an issue that transcends politics. It has united people of every party and political persuasion who believe strongly that it is now your responsibility as Prime Minister to return clarity and trust in public health messaging. We are clear that this can now only be achieved by removing Dominic Cummings from his post without further delay." The move follows similar warnings by public health experts, including members of the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Behaviours, and comes as a new YouGov poll shows that 71% of people think Dominic Cummings broke lockdown rules and 59% think he should resign. And that does include a majority of both Remain and Leave voters. Commenting on that, SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford said, "Boris Johnson must put his responsibilities to public health first and remove Dominic Cummings from post without further delay. The longer the Prime Minister takes to act, the more damage will be done to trust in his government and the public health advice. That is not a price worth paying." And Chris, seeing these leaders come together, all except, interestingly, the Labour Party, do you think this will have any impact on Boris Johnson? Do you think he's ready to listen to what opposition parties have to say?
I think we would have a greater influence if Keir Starmer actually showed a bit of leadership and actually joined us in solidarity, to actually get some positive action taken. It's all very well, fine and dandy for him to stand up at the weekend and say, we need an explanation. I'm sorry, Keir, but an explanation isn't good enough. Quite clearly, this guy broke the law, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as an awful lot of constituents are concerned. There are a lot of people out here hurting because they can't do what they would like to do. It's because the UK government and the Scottish government, Northern Ireland and Wales, have asked everyone to make a sacrifice. And I underline that, everyone. And that includes Dominic Cummings. It also includes Boris Johnson. Why did he decide to self-isolate 60 miles away down at Chequers when he checked out of the hospital? It isn't just Cummings that's at question here. And Douglas is absolutely right when he says it's basically the arrogance that they have got carte blanche to do what they want. Boris Johnson knows he's got an 80 seat majority, so accountability is right out the window there. If Keir Starmer wants to keep up this 24-point lead that he's got in the popularity polls over Boris Johnson, he needs to step up to the plate, because what he done at the weekend there was, pretty much what Jeremy Corbyn had done in his tenure, and his lily-livered response is, really, really not what's required at this moment in time.
Yeah, I should stress, we don't know that this was a crime. We do know that Durham police are investigating, And several retired police officers have said that they absolutely think it was. Several lawyers have said they absolutely think it was. But it is still just an allegation at this stage. Now, Douglas, there's been some other polling came out today, just comparisons between the two governments. 82% of people in Scotland think that Sturgeon is doing well in managing the crisis. Only 8% think she's doing badly. And 78% think the Scottish government's doing well versus 11% badly. Whereas with Johnson, only 30% of people in Scotland think he's doing well. 55% think he's doing badly, and 34% think the UK government is doing well, while 51% think they're doing badly. How big an impact do you think coronavirus is going to have on just the shape of politics in Scotland over the next year or so?
Well, I think what's been evident through the last 8 or 9 weeks, the majority of the country has been going through this, is that that in some respects the outlier in all of this has been England, because within the UK it seems like Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have been taking a much more been taking steps that have been a bit more sensible, a bit slower perhaps, in terms of them choosing to rush to getting everything back to what we think is normal. So it has been like two different countries, if you like, operating within the UK. And some of the figures that have come out in the poll you've just gone through, these numbers don't surprise me in the slightest. I think, as I said before, I think Nicola's come across as being competent, being confident in what she's doing, and I think she's been trying to take the nation with her along the way. You'll never sort of get everybody on your side, but I think she's worked particularly hard and been particularly astute at saying, this is a problem that we've all got to get through. If we hunker down together on it, then that we can achieve the relative safety for our families, get people back to work, etc., kids back to school. So there's been that divergence, I think, in the two different approaches from the government, whereas I think London has been more determined to just rush back when that could trigger a second spike in the outbreak of the virus. And I think that's the real danger as well, that nobody wants to see numbers in England go up again, and we don't want to see the returning to higher numbers of deaths being announced each day. But I think that the attitude by the Westminster government has been a bit more cavalier, and I think I hope they don't, but I think that they may pay a price for doing that. But we'll just need to again wait and see how this pans out. But I think overall, I think people have been generally quite happy with the performance of the First Minister in respect of her being confident and competent, and at least taking on some of the questions that the press have given to her. And whereas, again, when you look at some of the press conferences that we've witnessed over the last 8 or 9 weeks down south, it's been a bit more it'll be all right in the night type approach, which doesn't instill confidence in the general public, and I think that's been a great weakness of the way that they've gone about it.
Yeah, just to let you know, these numbers come from an Ipsos Mori poll. 1,006 Scots were questioned between the 14th and the 20th of May. So these numbers actually predate the Cummings story breaking. And so you would expect that perhaps some of these numbers will get even more extreme as we go forward. But we move now back to Holyrood, where there are still, of course, normal politics going on. And Education Secretary John Swinney has published a summary of the scientific advice behind the plans to reopen schools and early learning and childcare settings. In agreement with councils, professional associations and parent representatives, all schools will now return on the 11th of August, while ELC settings such as nurseries and playgroups are expected to open over the summer. The plans are contingent on scientific and medical advice that it is safe to proceed, and complementary public health measures such as Test and Protect being in place. The paper highlights growing evidence that the susceptibility to clinical disease of younger children is lower than for adults, generally good evidence that the severity of disease in children is lower than in adults, and the majority view of the Chief Medical Officer's advisory group is that actions to support distancing guidance in schools where children are in indoor environments for extended periods of time would be appropriate, while a minority believe that schools could operate without distancing. And responding to a statement from the Education Secretary this afternoon, Scottish Greens education spokesperson Ross Greer MSP said, "The Scottish Government is planning for exams to take place in 2021, but has confirmed that they may be cancelled at any point between now and next May. This leaves pupils and teachers in limbo for months during an incredibly difficult time. Given that most pupils will be expected to learn from home for much of the coming term, which Mr Swinney has acknowledged is to their detriment, the government should scrap the 2021 exams now and replace them with a system of continuous assessment throughout the year, which teachers can plan for before schools return in August." So, Chris, I'll come to you first. What do you make of this from the Greens, this suggestion that maybe we could cancel the exams next year? We've already obviously had to cancel them this year. Kids would normally have been sitting them right about now. And put in place a system where we can just monitor kids as we go, rather than build into exams that we might not be able to hold next year.
Well, I would like to say that this was after I was at school, right enough, but when I went through my college years, at that time, ScotVec introduced a revolutionary way of learning and testing, which was a modular composition, where basically you amassed your grades throughout the semester. And I think that takes a hell of a lot of pressure off of pupils. It's definitely time that we have to look at the way that the education has to evolve from this pandemic. At a time where it has been mooted that possibly Scotland could go down to a 4-day week. Could possibly schools work on a part-time basis? In on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then Tuesday and Thursday they've got a bit of home learning, possibly some homework at the weekend. And I was actually fascinated by I think it was the Swedish Prime Minister who was on BBC Question Time last week, who was saying that children benefit from being learning outdoors. I remember, and it was quite a while ago that I was at school, but you used to have art classes outside, and you used to have biological expeditions, for your biology class, and and if the teacher at the time decided that it was too hot in the classroom, it would take the chemistry class out and stuff like that. So, I think that the Scottish Government have to look at a more nuanced approach in order to keep kids engaged, and any positive motions from the Greens would be, welcome, and I think that John Swinney would, look on it favourably.
Yeah. Douglas, what do you think about that? Do you think this does this break in life that we've had has brought up a lot of ideas about how we might rebuild society in a better way going forward. Do you think there is scope in the education system for some real changes going forward?
Well, possibly there are. I think we can't ever forget that there've been thousands and millions of people's lives affected by this, and a lot of people have been lost along the way. However, there are opportunities there, I think, to maybe look at things differently for the future. And I just get the impression again that from a Scottish perspective that again Scotland's been taking its time about returning children to the classroom, and I think we've worked in a much more collegiate way in terms of talking to parents and the unions and schools and local authorities and COSLA to try and get the right kind of safe package put together that first of all keeps children safe if they're returning to school, but also I think we should be open, as I think John Swinney would be, to looking at different ways of the examinations for next year. And I think John at the moment probably just trying to keep as many options open as he possibly can, but at the same time thinking about just trying to get things back to some sense of normality. And I think that's one of the great things about school is that they give a structure to a child's day. It doesn't matter if you're at primary, nursery, primary, or secondary. I think a lot of children and young people who have seen on TV, for example, who have been interviewed, have said, I just want to get that sort of structure back in my day, seeing my friends, that kind of thing. But we need to do that in a measured way, and maybe as Chris suggested, in some sort of staged way, where not everybody goes back at the one time. And I'm sure that John Swinney will be talking to Ross Greer and the Greens and other parties as well, just to make sure that everyone signed that up for this, because we do want the thing that's about politics as well. It doesn't matter what party you speak to. I think everybody wants to see the best for the future generation, for their children, and I think irrespective of party, then there's an opportunity here, I think, maybe to look at things in a slightly different way. But at the moment, I think John Swinney, I think, is trying to make sure that we get kids back to school in a sort of organised way, and let's hope that we can maybe return to what the system that teachers already know, and other people can have trust in terms of the examinations. Yeah. And I just didn't know Chris was old enough to remember Spotvic. That was a bolt out the history books there. But yeah. But thanks for that wee reminder, Chris.
Yeah. Of course, we do see the English schools going back a lot sooner, and I've seen a number of parents suggesting that because they don't feel safe as parents, they're going to use their strong parental instincts and just not send the Waynes back, which apparently is how the law works these days. Anyway, we move on. New guidance has been published for retailers and manufacturers to consider how people can safely return to work, with updated guidance for construction to be published later in the week. The documents, which are among the first for a number of specific sectors, have been developed in consultation with business, trades unions and regulators. It'll provide advice on essential equipment and services needed to create the conditions for safer workplaces. Companies are expected to undertake a robust risk management approach that has been developed and maintained through joint working with employees. This will offer assurances to workers when the time is right to return to work. Working to the phased approach in the route map on easing lockdown published last week, it details the steps required for businesses, acknowledging that some will face more complications when reopening than others, while also considering the impact on employees. And Chris, I know you'll be glad to hear that the Scottish Government has been negotiating quite a lot with trade unions in order to set this guidance out.
Yeah, well, actually, the trade union group of the SNP met last night in a Zoom meeting for the executive, where we discussed the STUC's 5-point bullet plan in order to get companies and businesses back into work, which is a a staged approach which encompasses obviously the employer's health and safety, the employees' health and safety, but as well as that, also the customer and the people who are in the supply chain as well. So we discussed that at length. We see quite an awful lot of sense in it, and it's something that I think that the Scottish Government will take an awful lot of good points from in order to form the approach that the Scottish Government will take. And this is in stark contrast. I have to point out that, because we haven't mentioned my dear old friend Richard in a while, this is in stark contrast of the fact that Scottish Labour continually say that the Scottish Government do not engage with the trade unions. And I think that's selling his own body, the STUC. I think that's selling them very, very short because the trade union group have a very good working relationship with the STUC. And sadly, 9 times out of 10, more often it's Scottish Labour that don't want to engage with the trade union group within the SNP rather than the other way about.
Yeah. Well, we move on now just to our last bit of our last bit of Scottish Government news for today. And new guidance for passengers and operators in Scotland has been produced to help prepare the lifting of some lockdown restrictions. Today's travel guidance is published as part of the Transport Transition Plan. It follows the publication of the detailed route map by the Scottish Government regarding next steps last week, the route map for transitioning through and out of the crisis. The guidance advises passengers about when and how to safely access public transport through good hand hygiene, respecting physical distancing, using face coverings, and avoiding busier times. The plan is clear that continuing to work from home should be the default position where possible. Flexible start and finish times and making more active travel choices will be vital in easing the number of people accessing public transport. And Douglas, again, this has partly been in discussion with trade unions, with employers about making staggering start and finish times at work, but also encouraging people to wear masks on public transport, perhaps making that compulsory. What do you make of Michael Matheson's statement today?
Well, I think it's good that we do have I know we'll talk about transport, but it's good to have that route map laid out as it was last week, because it does give a degree of direction, I think, to people who might not think where is all this going. How do you think I'll be able to get back to do my job? How will I actually get from A to B to get to where I'm employed, etc., etc. How safe is it going to be? So I think these are the kind of questions that are in people's heads, and I was quite pleased today that I think Michael Matheson announced an extra. I think it had gone from £10 million up to £30 million to actually support some of these projects, like opening pop-up cycle lanes. And as you suggested, we need to think about the social distancing within a train or within the bus or whatever means people are using to get to work. And it will require some changes in the way that people go about their daily business. Wearing a mask will be quite an unusual thing for the majority of us to do, but. I think if it is for the greater good, if it's for the common weal of the nation, then I think people will be able to will be willing to step up to the plate to do that. And again, I think it's just part of that sort of steady as she goes message that we're going to get things back to maybe not quite how they were before, but in an ordered way. But each individual, each family, each community needs to play its part. And if you do that, then that we're going to get back to something approaching normality, maybe a wee bit faster and a wee bit safer than you maybe would have expected. So I think that's the underlying message. Michael's, I think, been doing a good job in terms of putting that over and raising some of the issues in his paper today that was put out.
Yeah. And Chris, just before we wrap up for the evening, I'll throw you the softest of softballs. How much easier would it be to do this transport planning if we had more public sector transport?
Kenny, you're too kind to me. I've been a great advocate for the devolvement of the powers necessary that Scotland takes its own path, should I say, towards restoring the bulk of the national transport back into public hands. We only need to look at the debacle that we've had down on the Clyde that the Scottish Government were able to salvage. We also look again at the woeful inadequacies of the Abellio contract. But again, I would like to go much further. As Douglas had pointed out, that I'm old enough to remember Scotvic. Well, I'm old enough to remember where Glasgow Council actually owned all the buses and operated the corporation transport for the benefit of the Glasgow citizens. So I would, again, I would encourage that to possibly restart. I do know that there's a consultation coming up about the contract for the buses within the Greater Glasgow area. So we have got the chance to put things back the way that they were, because they weren't broken. So I can see no reason as to why we tried to fix it. And if it can work in the Lothian districts, then it can certainly work in the Glasgow districts. I would just like to quickly bring up one major point while we're talking about transport here, and I was deeply saddened to hear today by British Airways that they are in restarting their summer programme. They're looking to take on staff that they have made redundant, and in doing that, they are going to alter their terms and conditions. And I think that's absolutely shocking. And I would hope that possibly Douglas would maybe have a wee word with Gavin Newlands to see what could be done about that for my former comrades over at Glasgow Airport.
Well, that is all we've got time for. You may be able to discuss that a wee bit after the show's over. But Douglas, do you very quickly want to come in on that?
Well, just to say, in terms of what Gavin's been doing, I think he's been playing an absolute blinder in terms of the contacts he's been making, especially as Glasgow Airport is in his constituency as well. But we had a really good meeting on Zoom last week, I think it was, with Unite, who had put together a document, sort of master plan for the future of aviation in the UK. I was trying to make the point that regional connectivity was possibly the big thing that we should be focusing on in Scotland. I think from some of the other MPs who are maybe representing the likes of Heathrow or Gatwick or whatever, I think my arguments fell on stony ground there. But I do know that Gavin's working really hard, sort of up front and behind the scenes as well, to try and maintain that industry in his own constituency, and which benefits the whole of the west of Scotland. But I think again the point's been made by British Airways, and that's been again a big chunk of my post bag as well. I'm fairly close to Edinburgh Airport on the other side of the country, and I've had a lot of constituents who are involved with British Airways, totally disgusted with the way that they've been treated, especially with the closure of the Edinburgh hub, which will cut off a lot of flights between Edinburgh and the hub airports in London. And just on the issue of privatise or taking industries back into public ownership again, I think it's one of these opportunities that might befall the Scottish Government in the coming weeks and months. And if we can make a public investment in some of these organisations, whether it be the buses or whether it be care homes or whatever, then I think that's an opportunity that we should be grasping, because I've been reading in the last week or so about some of the care homes who, all the profits end up in some account in the Cayman Islands and are not paying tax and all the rest of it. I'm sure not everyone is like that, but there's something about this society that we're in at the moment that is far too focused on lining the pockets of people who are already fairly wealthy individuals and are not providing the level of service I think that we expect as citizens at the other end of the scale. And I think if this COVID crisis gives us an opportunity to try and redress that balance, then it's something that I would put across in a box to support.
Yeah. Well, that's nice to end on a note of agreement there. So I would like to thank, obviously, Douglas Chapman and Chris McCusker for joining us. Oh, it's been a great discussion tonight. And we'd like to thank you at home for joining us as well. It's always great to have an audience for these shows as well. If you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, we would love it if you could. Just go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up as a supporter there, and your £5 a month will make a huge difference to what we're able to do here at Broadcasting Scotland. If you can't, then please don't feel bad about it. The shows will always be free to view online, and we do understand that times are tough for a lot of people just now. But you can still help us by following us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, or looking us up on Facebook. Just search Broadcasting Scotland. Then share the programmes around, talk to people, let them know why you watch Broadcasting Scotland. Be our marketing team for us. That's the biggest thing that you can do for us just now. And also, of course, if you want to get involved in Broadcasting Scotland, whether working behind the camera or in front of the camera, there's always jobs to be done. So please do get in touch if you have any interest in getting involved in making television. But that is all we've got time for. So once again, thank you to Douglas and to Chris. I'll be back again tomorrow at 7 for another episode. But until then, have a great evening. Good night.